Welcome to Orchestrate All the Things. I'm George Anatiotis, and we'll be connecting the dots together. Stories about technology, data, AI, and media, and how they flow into each other, shaping our lives.
Software engineering is being transformed by AI faster than any other domain. Unpacking how this transformation is playing out may offer a glimpse into the future. Greg Foster's journey into software engineering began in an unlikely place, a Nevada high school where he couldn't land a job at Starbucks. Instead of serving coffee, he taught himself software development. Foster developed what he calls a lifelong obsession with the craft of software engineering. That obsession evolved from building apps to building for other builders. From Airbnb to co-founding Graphite, where he now serves as the CTO, running what he calls a dev tools team for the entire industry. Foster doesn't just have a front seat to watch how AI is changing software engineering. He gets to shape the change. We caught up and talked about the past, present, and future of software engineering. The takeaway: there is a world of difference between vibes and solid foundations for software engineering at scale.
I hope you will enjoy this. If you like my work on Orchestrate All the Things, you can subscribe to my podcast, available on all major platforms, my self-published newsletter, also syndicated on Substack, HackerNoon, Medium, and DZone, or follow Orchestrate All the Things on your social media of choice.
I'm optimistic. I think it's never been a more fun time to get involved in software engineering. There's never been more things to build. In late 2010s, we were polishing really most incremental things were like a lot of polish on existing ideas. Suddenly, everything's blown wide open. There's so much overhang. There's so much opportunity to build really novel, exciting ideas. For anyone listening, I really, truly, deeply believe there's never been a better, easier, more fun time to get involved in creating software engineering, building apps, building companies. So I very much encourage people to go try it. Yeah. I think we're entering a world where code review has never become more important, because I used to be able to trust, George, if you and I were coding together and you submit me a code change at work, I used to be able to trust that at least you read it and thought about it really deeply. Heck, you wrote it. And I'm there and I'm going to double check you, but I have some trust in you as a human and as a teammate. Now, in 2025, I don't know. Maybe you thoughtfully wrote it, or maybe you were watching, a TV show and you asked Cloud Code to write it, or maybe Codex or one of the background agents just created this code change and no human has ever laid eyes on it. Now it really matters that the code review step, someone's grokking it, someone is thinking deeply about it and testing it and taking ownership for the impact of that code change as it goes out the door. It's interesting that the purpose of code review, I think, is really becoming magnified in its importance in pedagogy, in accountability, and some of these deep-rooted meanings. It's so fun to observe. I think DevTools has never been experiencing more change and upheaval than it has in the last 2 years. And that's a blast. It's a blast being at the center of that. If I look over the arc of DevTool companies over the last 20 years, you had very little action for a long time. And then the very first kind of meaningful DevTool companies in my mind were that of GitHub, Stripe, if you can call Stripe a DevTool company. These are in the kind of mid 2000s. You start getting the birth of Heroku and Datadog, GitLab in 2012, starting to become a little bit more popular. But there's also for a long time, a skepticism of DevTool companies by venture capitalists of how big can they really get and what's the total market size. You constantly had this fear that open source would be undercutting the total amount you could build for these dev tools. And also for a long time, engineering teams had very low purchasing power. So I remember when I was working in the mid 2010s at Airbnb, and it'd be like a whole thing to go and expense IntelliJ, and I'd be like, hey, I really want to expense this IDE for 20 or 40 bucks, and it was non-trivial for me as an IC to go make that argument. And it's not until 2025, or really now, it's like, oh no, actually the most insane, bleeding edge, fastest growing, highest revenue companies in history happen to be DevTool companies, the Lovables and Cursors and Cloud Codes of the world. So it's just been fascinating to watch that growth as a founder of the space. Cool. I'm Greg. I'm one of the co-founders of Graphite. I lead engineering here. But before working on Graphite, I've been obsessed with software engineering for, at this point, more than half my life, hopefully my whole life as it keeps going on. I spent most of my time growing up in Nevada, in Reno, which is really fun place. Not a lot of engineering going on. My father was in mechanical engineering. My older sister got into mechanical engineering. I was the black sheep who just liked playing with computers. In high school, my parents are like, "Oh, you're turning 15. You got to go get a job. We're not going to pay for your gas money." And I looked around for a job. I applied to all the local Starbuckses with a high school resume that has no no actual work experience on it, as one does. And this was just after the financial crisis. So there was people with college degrees who couldn't get a job at Starbucks, let alone me as a high schooler. But I turned my attention, actually at the time, to iOS development. I had already been really interested in computer design and Photoshop and CAD, and that was very fun. And I was really interested in coding. I didn't know much about it, and I had a family Intel computer, one of those towers, but I was able to pirate VMware onto it, and then I was able to pirate an image of Mac OS onto it. And then from there, I could do Xcode, and from Xcode, I could run an iOS simulator. So I was like several layers deep of simulation, but it was enough that I could actually start coding iOS apps. And I didn't know much about coding. It was a lot of Googling, and I read Coding for Dummies. I watched an iTunes U university video on learning how to do iOS coding. And I remember, and I made my first iOS app. Luckily, I was pretty good at graphic design, so I was able to make it look good. And I made like a pros and cons app. But it was early enough in the App Store where it was actually one of the only pros and cons app. And you could make small utilities and sell them for $1, and it would do okay. And sure, it had a lot of memory leaks and would crash after 20 or 30 minutes, but that was fine. In mobile, you could actually get by. Like, the apps were destructible enough. It got the functionality there. And I had a lot of fun doing that. So I kept making iPhone apps, and I would walk around my high school and I would pay my friends $1. I would actually carry a stack of like, $21 bills. And I'd give my friends $1. Like, hey, give me your phone. I'm going to buy my app. I'm going to rate it 5 stars. I'm going to give you back your phone. I'm going to give you $1. And I would use this to bootstrap like the first 20 or 30 reviews. And then it would snowball a little bit. So I found a lot of love of coding and entrepreneurial kind of attitude. Then I went into college and I studied CS proper. That was all on the side. I still had to do my high school classes. So college was so exciting because it was like, oh, you can actually just make your studies and your passion, your hobby of coding one thing. I didn't have to like keep rushing to finish my homework so I could go do coding. I could do the same thing. And then it was even better after I graduated because, like, heck, you could actually make your full-time job and your full pay just doing some great coding. So I joined Airbnb after I graduated. I was doing internships, so I joined them after I graduated, and it was really fun. I got to go really deep. I was hired. It was so funny, actually. I was hired as an iOS engineer, but then I immediately got reorged onto an infrastructure team, working initially on all their notification infrastructure, all the emails, SMS, push notifications. And from there, I got reorged eventually onto dev tools and building out their internal CLI, their deployment infrastructure, some of their feature flag stuff, their test data creation systems. I was really deeply embroiled in dev tools and infra. And at this point, I'd been coding for many years. And so I was reading all these textbooks about like, what is the best way to engineer stuff, clean code, clean architecture, all the O'Reilly books. And I was like really becoming obsessed with the craft of software engineering. And that played into being a DevTools team member as well. You could get really deep on that. But this is kind of what took me to Graphite, where if you spend enough time being obsessed about the craft of engineering, not just how to build something well, but how should all people engineer things really well? And what are the tools we can build, and becoming a tool builder for other engineers? That obsession is you're kind of limited within an individual company. At Airbnb, and I could serve 1,000 other engineers, but it was kind of limited. It was not the core of Airbnb is not to build great dev tools. It's to build a great hosting platform for travel. And I was really excited about the idea of like, what if I was able to work at a company where like the core of the company is just building the world's best dev tools for all the other software engineers? And what if I could do it with the best people I know in my life at the craft, which were my co-founders now, some people I knew from college, some of my best friends. That was such an exciting idea for me, and that was exciting enough where it was like, hey, I know startups are risky. I don't care. We're gonna take a leap of faith, and I'm gonna be able to go full in on this obsession. So my walk of life has been just deeper into engineering, and deeper and closer to my obsession of like building for other engineers. And here we are. And now I get to. It's funny. I get to serve all these Airbnb, many companies. I get to be in Slack channels with so many wonderful engineers, hundreds, thousands of companies who I would be so excited to work at myself. But I get to be building for them and be in Slack with them and go talk to them at user meetups. And I feel like I get to be a DevTools team for the entire industry. So I'm living the dream.
Yeah, it does sound like you are. I mean, it sounds like coding started as a kind of passion project for you, and then you gradually managed to get more and more involved. Mm-hmm. So I guess a lot of people will sort of identify with that. Not everyone gets to found a startup, but this is a path that I think many people will identify with to some extent. So my question to you, as someone who has been as along some parts of that path, I never ended founding a startup, at least not a successful one. But regardless, so I guess many people would naturally tend to ask is like, okay, fine. So if you love coding that much, and now you're a CEO and founder, do you still get to code?
Well, for the record, CTO. I don't want to do my co-founder shortchange. CTO. So, but actually nice because being the CTO, as I have a slightly better excuse than CEO to code. It's evolved over time. Initially, Graphite, it was just the three of us co-founders, myself, Tomas, and Merrill, and me and Tomas did a lot of coding. We were kind of like the engine of the company. We just sat and coded all day, and then there was no meetings. Your meetings were just like taking a walk, so you could take a break from coding, and then you code more. This is like 2020, 2021. And then, we were able to bring up a couple engineers onto the team, but I still got to code a ton. I did a very little amount of recruiting, a little bit of sales, a little bit of management, but I was really just still coding most of your time. If you have two engineering teammates, you're still just coding a lot. And then it got bigger. And then we got up to like 6 or 7 engineers. This is, approaching 2023 and beyond. And I coded less. Now I was coding maybe like only half my time or less. I was still helping on key projects, but it was not the most important thing I was doing. The most important thing I was doing was trying to ramp up and enable these other amazing software engineers and help recruit and bring on more folks. And also join in on sales meetings and help on founder-related activities. And coding became something I was still passionate about. And I still had kind of high leverage because I had so much context of the code base after 3 years. I could still be quite impactful on key moments and key projects. I was also doing a lot of the SRE style responsibilities for a long time. So permanently on call for the company, permanently helping on every incident, and helping teach other people how to like roll back the system and recover the infrastructure. But it became less and less impactful. And I think I really took on a mindset of how can I replace myself? Because I can do a good job, but to be honest, even if I'm amazing, I'm not that much better than 2 other amazing teammates I can bring onto the team. If I'm doing a really good job hiring and I'm bringing on incredible people, look, maybe I'm 10% better. I don't know. I don't want to like flatter myself, but like I don't think I can beat 2 other amazing people. I think my time is better spent building out the team, enabling other people, getting an engine. If I get sick, I want there to be redundancy. I want this team to be able to operate, and that's going to free me up to do more ambiguous tasks. The other thing I find about software engineering is as we've gone further and further at the company, the software engineering, while critically impactful, is less and less ambiguous. And I think that as a co-founder, my time is often best spent dealing with projects and problems that are just we have no idea how to even get started. We don't know what the answer is. It's very unclear. It's so messy, and that's actually a really good use of my time to go in there and try and apply structure and figure it out and experiment and debug. If there's systems and projects that are pretty clear cut but just challenging, I think it's much better use of my time to help enable and set other people up for success to execute those projects. So that shift has really happened over the years. And nowadays, now in 2025, I spend most of my time actually recruiting, building out the team. We've 4x'd the engineering team this year. Actually, we've just over 3x it so far. And by the end of the year, I hope to 4x it from 10 going on to 40 engineers. And I'll tell you what, it's a relatively straightforward job, but there is a lot of time and energy that goes into meeting hundreds of candidates, running so many interviews, helping issue offers and convincing folks to join, and then helping ramp them up once they're in the room, actually like getting them set up for success and explaining the history of the company and showing them the architecture we have going and setting them up onto teams. That is just absolutely a full-time job for me, and it's one I'm happy to do. It's actually really fun because I actually like meeting people and nerding out about our technology. But I do this year, because I've been so obsessed with that expansion, I've done very little coding. And if I'm coding, it's often for my own guilty pleasure and not because it's like the most impactful thing I could do for the team. There's like a little bit of a tear roll down my cheek situation where I'm like, there's so many projects where I'm like, this would be so fun to get in there and code. But you know what? It would be so fun for me to get in there and code. I'd rather hand it to an amazing teammate, let them have the fun, and I'll keep doing whatever job needs to be done to keep scaling out the company.
Yeah, I think this sort of dilemma, let's say, or career path choice is, again, common for many people who start with purely technical background, and then through life, they sort of evolve into different roles as well. I also remember very clearly about myself when I was kind of crossing that chasm, let's say. Part of me was like feeling really guilty for not contributing that much to the code base, but then I realized what you also sound to have realized. So I can make more impact in other areas. But I think it's a little bit like, players turning coaches. There's a saying that goes something like you have to kill the player within you if you want to be a successful coach. And I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
a little bit similar like in this situation.
Part of the mindset I adopt is, I think about myself as an engineer and a builder. I really have that identity in myself. But maybe what I'm building is no longer the code base, but I'm building the team and the company and the community, and I can still take pride in that. I can still look at that like an engineering project. But it's not about shipping a bunch of lines of code. It's about helping build out a new team or a new org. And there's still problems to be solved. Absolutely, it'd be I'd be naive to say there's not like interesting problems to solve within that. So I do still but I view like the thing I'm creating at this point is more the company than just the lines of code of the project.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so the next question I have to you, I wanted to get your opinion on how you have seen the craft, the art and science of coding throughout the years that you've been exercising it, or whether you're actually coding yourself or in your current role. And uh, I got an interesting start, let's say, to this because I was going through your LinkedIn profile just
Mhm.
before we connected, and in LinkedIn, the things you share sort of get frozen in time, basically.
Mm.
So at some point, you share the link to the website of your company, and I got through that. I got the opportunity to check the motto that you had at the time that it was shared, which I guess was like maybe a couple of years ago, and it went something like the end about Graphite. So the end-to-end developer platform, Graphite helps teams on GitHub ship higher quality software faster, which is pretty succinct and gets the message across. But then the interesting part is like if you fast forward to today,
Mhm.
that same motto has evolved to ship higher quality code faster. Graphite is the complete AI code review platform built to keep you unblocked. And I think that's very telling because it sort of reflects the fact that, within a couple of years, really, coding and AI or AI assisted coding has become sort of the norm, I would
Mm.
say. So, how have you experienced that? Because obviously you've been around for much longer
Yeah.
before, the chat GPTs and cloud codes of the world. So, how have you experienced this transition?
It's so fun to observe. I think dev tools has never been experiencing more change and upheaval than it has in the last 2 years. And that's a blast. It's a blast being at the center of that. If I look over the arc of dev tool companies over the last 20 years, you had very little action for a long time. And then the very first kind of meaningful dev tool companies in my mind were that of GitHub, Stripe, if you can call Stripe a dev tool company. These are in the kind of mid 2000s. You start getting the birth of Heroku and Datadog, GitLab in 2012, starting to become a little bit more popular. But there's also for a long time, a skepticism of dev tool companies by venture capitalists of how big can they really get and what's the total market size. You constantly had this fear that open source would be undercutting the total amount you could build for these dev tools. And also for a long time engineering teams had very low purchasing power. So I remember when I was working in the mid 2010s at Airbnb, and it would be like a whole thing to go and expense IntelliJ, and I'd be like, hey, I really want to expense this IDE for 20 or 40 bucks. And it was non-trivial for me as an IC to go make that argument and do that. And everyone would be like, you can get Vim or you can get all these tools for free. There's really like a aversion to paying for stuff. You compare that to like being a account executive on the sales team or in marketing, and you need to expense some stuff. Man, those are pretty generous budgets in order to get the correct tooling you need, like Salesforce and other stuff to do your job. Even GitHub on the per seat model is not the most profitable. People would find ways to they really made a lot more money, I think, on selling compute and testability, but the per seats was not the most high revenue situation. Um, and that persisted for a long time. Coming into 2020, that was a little bit the world we were entering in, where it was believed that you could have great companies as dev tool companies, but it was not the most lucrative. The most lucrative and interesting ones would be fintech or crypto, stuff like that. It's not until 2025, or really now, it's like, oh no, actually, the most insane, bleeding edge, fastest growing, highest revenue companies in history happen to be dev tool companies, the Lovables and Cursors and Cloud Codes of the world. So it's just been fascinating to watch that growth as a founder of the space. The other observations I have is that, you know, for the longest time to create a successful dev tool, company, I think there was actually quite a stable formula. The formula, in my opinion, was you go and look at all these companies who have large engineering teams, Facebook, Google, Amazon, also mid-sized ones, Ubers and Twitters and Airbnbs, and you say, oh, great, what internal systems have you all built? PagerDuty, this app that makes a phone call and texts you when there's an incident, that came from inspiration of tooling that was built internally at some companies like AWS. A lot of the best graphing software, a lot of the best deployment infrastructure, Airflow, all these kind of systems, they were built first within large companies. And then some entrepreneur would say, oh, that's quite a good idea. Let me take that and let me bring that to the rest of the market. Let's not lock up that wonderful idea at a single company. Let's bring it out in a way that everyone can adopt it, even if they don't have a large engineering team to just build it internally. I think it's been really the formula of dev tools for quite a long time. And part of the reason I think this formula is so successful is because dev tools are really unique. Engineers are able to solve their own problems. This is not always the case in marketing, sales, recruiting. It's not like a recruiter is like, oh, I'll just build my own recruiting software. But dev tools, engineers will just try and build and solve and hack together their own solutions. So if there is not an existing tool somewhere locked up in some company, then you got to question, was there ever a real problem for any of the engineers in the world that you'd be selling back to? So I think this formula existed. What's unique, what's different about the times we're living in now, you ask the value prop changing at Graphite, is with the AI, that formula is breaking down a little bit because there's so much innovation happening so fast that you can't just say, oh, for 5 years, Google has had this amazing tool, let me just bring it to the rest of the market. You say, hey, AI got better 2 months ago, and we're going to immediately try to innovate and productize that. We're going to try and bring that to the rest of the market. It's finally the actual companies dev tool companies are kind of getting ahead of what's being built internally at these private companies, or at least staying neck and neck. So that formula is breaking down a little bit. And then the last thing I'll say, you talk about the value prop changing on the Graphite website. For the longest time, we were kind of applying that formula. For us, that formula was, in the world of code collaboration, code review, we could take good ideas from Google and Facebook and other companies. We say, hey, they've done amazing things for how they stack their code changes, how they have inboxes to find those PRs, the interfaces that they do to review those, the systems they use to merge that stuff in. We don't have to get too innovative. We can come up with new ideas, but we don't have to. We can actually take a lot of tried and tested patterns, technologies, and just unlock them from Google and Facebook and bring them to the rest of the industry. That was a generally successful enough strategy. What's shifted with AI is we've had to get a lot more innovative. We had to say, okay, what is the bleeding edge of this? Let's try and nudge that forward. We can no longer just take inspiration it's not like all these patterns have existed for 5 years. We actually now need to be the innovators ourselves too, and intermingle that. Now we're very lucky because we have quite a good platform, and it's great to have a platform that you can layer on AI innovations. But it's had to, you talk about that shift in the H1 header of our marketing, and I think that shift has been felt internally too in our product development cycles.
Okay, so how are you also seeing your users adopting and adapting to this change? So you spoke about the fact that the cycle of innovation is going really fast these days.
Oh, yeah.
But are you also seeing the same thing on the adoption side?
I think so. I think it's actually really helped us. As I watched the selling and distributing Graphite over the last 5 years, in the first couple of years, it was a good tool. It was very useful. But there would always be that hesitancy from engineers like, ooh, can I really expense a $20 tool, even if it makes me 20% faster? And you think, hey, you're paid a lot of money. You should, if this can make you 20% faster, you should absolutely expense $20. Like that is the easiest deal in history. But people would be hesitant around making that expense. And they'd also be hesitant around security. There was a lot of questions around how secure and trusted, should you be about your code base. It's tricky. It's not user data, so it doesn't follow all of the really locked down protections of like if you're exposing your user payment information or something like that. But there is a general belief like your code is kind of sensitive and you should be quite protective about that. But I feel like in 2020, 2021, like people were just like hadn't quite made up their minds. We were really helped by the wave of AI tooling in the distribution and adoption, because suddenly every engineer was expensing like 5 random AI coding tools, and every AI coding tool they're using and every plugin and every trial they're using on their laptop is also indexing their entire company's code base, for better or for worse. Some of the companies, I think actually do a very good job with the security, and I'm very trusting of them. But I'm sure some of those side projects, some of those like scrappy startups, are probably doing a bad job. And companies don't really have a way to limit this, or are not currently applying a way to limit this, because the code bases, because of Git and because of Git supportability, are all on the user's laptop. And there's not a lot of restrictions of what an engineer can randomly install on their laptop to help them do their jobs. So suddenly, you have the code bases are a little bit less secure. People are expensing more, and it has incredible top-down support. It was really interesting. This wasn't like a rebellion of the engineers against management. It's actually, you read this in Hacker News, it's actually a lot of management kind of pushing this down, where you have these like executives saying, hey, why are we not adopting more AI tools? Why are we not using like Claude Code and Cursor? I keep hearing it's making these other companies faster. They're actually kind of pushing their engineering teams to do this, and they're pushing past security and past procurement. So the adoption massively picked up, and it was very helpful for us because we'd been sitting here for years, creating value, being able to measure it, being able to have great, success and reputation. And suddenly the industry was much more open-minded to adopting dev tools like ours, with or without AI. But it really kind of opened the door. That's great, and that's how it should be. And I'm so supportive of this because, again, engineers are incredible craftsmen and practitioners. If you're a dentist, and you're like, hey, I need to expense a $20 tool here and a $1,000 tool here. If you're a car mechanic, of course you have reasonably expensive tools that help enable you to do your job well. I think engineers should be the same way. I think that absolutely people should be expensing on the order of magnitude of $10 to $1,000 tools to help us do our jobs, assuming the impact is there, assuming it's real. 100%. Like that's like it was shocking for so long that engineers like didn't actually have that budget to expense and adopt tools.
Yeah. Well, I think the key word there is assuming. So, when we talk about developer productivity, basically, I think that's a conversation in and of itself, really, because we need to sort of come to an agreement on how to measure this, infamous developer productivity before we can talk about, the impact of AI or really anything about that at all. So I'm pretty sure you must have, your own opinion and your own references that you go to there, because this is pretty core to what you do. So I'm curious to hear, what your take is on developer productivity.
I think that developer productivity, as you point out, is extremely hard to measure. At the same time, I'm convinced that the wave of AI dev tools we're seeing right now, on average in general, especially the good ones like Claude Code and Cursor and so on, are absolutely increasing developer productivity. So I think it's incredibly hard to measure, but I believe the value is there and being had. It's hard to measure. It's hard to measure because engineering in many ways is very much like an art form. For better or for worse. If you work with sales, you work with recruiters, you can get kind of numerical around the outcomes. You can be like, hey, you're account executive. What's the deal volume that we close? How much revenue did we close? If you're a recruiter, it's like, how many people did you hire? We all know within engineering, you can't really just be like, oh, how many lines of code did you change? That's a pretty tough way to measure it. Now you can look at the aggregate statistics, and I actually think that people actually underrate that in general, the statistics do tell a good story. If I look at how many lines of code a person changed, the median lines of code per PR, the number of PRs they merged in, the average time to merge, the number of code reviews they gave, if I look at like enough of these metrics, the reality is I'll actually see a reasonable correlation between a strong engineer and a weak engineer. It's not the full story. Of course, if you're working on different parts of the code base, if you're a data scientist, you're working on infrastructure, you're shipping a front end feature, there's going to be variations within those sets. Sometimes though, I think people are a little too dismissive. Like fundamentally, like if you're doing a ton of good work, it will actually reflect and show in the metrics. And likewise, if you're taking a week off randomly, like it's going to show in the metrics, but it's not the full story. And I think you do have to like really build in the qualitative side of this story as well. I think, but these are tools, and I think about like okay, like let's say we treat engineering more like an art form and a little bit less like a factory line. Okay, but like look at artists. Would you rather have a digital camera or not have a digital camera, or just only have a paintbrush? Sure, yeah. If you give me only a paintbrush, I can still do amazing things to create amazing art. But maybe the majority of people would like a digital camera. Maybe the majority of people on average can do wonderful work with a digital camera. It's going to up-level them and enable them. So even if we view it more as an art form and less as like a factory line, there's a really valid case for innovative tools to up-level the productivity and create new forms of creation. And the last thing I'll say is like, there's kind of a gut test here, which is like, if this stuff was not real, if it was kind of fake value, I would expect a lot of engineers to not actually use it. And I expect a lot of managers to not push it. But if I have both managers pushing teams to adopt it, and I know every engineer I work with uses some form of AI autocomplete, cursor style agentic editing or even full like kind of headless Claude Code stuff. Everyone I know is using something like this. So they're using it voluntarily. People who are self-managed and are doing like their own project companies are using it, and managers are pushing it. Okay, that's a lot of qualitative energy and data points pushing to the fact that like, oh, this must actually be quite productive and useful. So I think the argument that this is kind of like pseudo value, I don't really buy it. I think it's real.
Okay, well, I think there are a couple counter arguments that one could bring to this conversation. So first the top down, let's say, push for adoption. I've heard stories from organizations where executives were like, literally, please do something with AI. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have the most well-informed view, or that they necessarily know exactly what they mean. They feel peer pressure, and as you also very correctly pointed out, software engineering is something that stands out as a prime candidate for adopting AI for a number of reasons, because the tools can have a lot of impact, because there's a lot of there are many advanced tools as well, because of the fact that there's a lot of code out there for the model to train and so on. So top down pressure does not necessarily equate value in that case. So I would argue that maybe the opposite signal could be more telling. So having people spontaneously adopt these tools.
And that's my question. It's like, if you yourself or the people are they using these tools in their personal projects? If they're starting companies where they themselves are their own managers, are they using these tools or not using these tools? And for me, everyone I know in these examples, they are using Cursor, they are using Claude Code very voluntarily. That makes me think, okay, hey, like there's actually a correct connection here. It's yes, the management team wants it, but also like the ICs are voluntarily picking this up, even in cases where no one is pressuring them to use it. And I think the reality is it creates productivity. Now, who doesn't want to use this, or who are the people who make an argument against adopting these tools? I don't think, what I've come to realize is not all engineers want to be maximally productive. And it's not, I don't say that like with a ton of judgment. I don't think that's like a moral sin or anything. Like you don't have to live your life by trying to maximize productivity. As much as engineers are also the same people who love like biohacking and like eating like the optimal nutrition. Like, look, you don't have to live your life like that. You're allowed to actually just say, no, I like the way I do it. I don't like change all the time. I don't want to throw away all these things I've learned. It's kind of scary. I think there's a valid argument there. And again, I would equate it back to like, if you're an amazing painter and like people are coming out with digital cameras, you can make a lot of arguments against the digital cameras of why you don't want to adopt it, why it's not perfect in all cases. In low light, it's not the same. You can come up with all these kind of edge cases. But I do think if you are obsessed with productivity and you are trying to maximize that output and productivity, then I do think you'd be lying to yourself to really be against adopting and trying some of these tools. And yes, you might have to learn new patterns or change the way you work or get a little bit creative, but that's a choice, and that's a willingness. So the engineers that I see who are most resistant these days, now that we're like late 2025, who are most resistant to AI tools, I think are folks who care more about their enjoyment of coding, a little bit more about the craft, who are a little bit more afraid of change, and that's okay. Again, I don't want to say like that's negative, but if we're talking about developer productivity or talking about maximizing it, I think it would be a little bit silly to not be trying and experimenting and adopting some of these tools.
Well, definitely, I can definitely see how this type of persona that you described would react to that. Like, okay, basically, this is the way we've always done it. I enjoy like coding manually, so I'll just say no to these things altogether. But I think, and I'm also kind of in watch and learn mode here, because I have minimal exposure to these tools myself. So I'm just trying to pick the signals here and figure out what's really going on. But and also it's we tend to forget that we're only a couple of years in this whole thing. So I think we're all in learning mode still.
100%. You know what's the one thing I'll throw on as well? This stuff is fun. I love it's so great. It's fun in a way that like coding's not always the most fun. We've all had times where we're debugging and it's like you get the end of your rope, it's not fun. When I think we're always like, you read these articles and everyone's so afraid of like they used to be really good at like handcrafting as an artisan, and now this factory line is going to come and take it away. And I do think that's a scary hypothetical. But what I see in practice is my weekend projects have never been more fun. Like before, I'd be like, okay, I don't really want to like figure out this new technology or play with Rust or something like that. Now it's like, you know what? Hey, I'm gonna have like it's the weekend. I'm gonna put a sports game on the TV, and I'm gonna open up Quad Coder Cursor, and I'm just gonna wing it, and I might even finish this side project over the weekend. It's unlocked a new funness to software engineering that didn't exist for me before. I get more flow state. I don't hit as many bugs. So I'm very thankful that there's also an element that like it's not completely soul crushing. It's not fully removed all the aspects. In fact, as an experienced coder, I kind of really enjoy it.
Mhm. Okay. I mean, definitely having fun while doing that is a bonus. Nobody would deny that. But what I was trying to get to is like, okay, so we're still trying. All of us are still trying to learn what these things are capable of, and what the good use cases versus the not so good use cases are. And
Mhm.
I would like to refer here to a very, very recent use case that Andrei Karpathy shared with the world. And for people who may not have heard the name, he's a very famous AI engineer and also the person who literally coined the term vibe coding. So sort of this interactive flow state with your AI assistant that helps you get code out of the way, so to say. So he basically said, okay, so here's my latest project. I tried shipping that using vibe coding and AI assistant, and it completely failed. And he also interestingly gave the reason why, in his opinion, that failed, because it was a new project. It was the architecture behind it was elaborate and innovative, you may as well say. So what he
Mm.
found was that AI didn't work in that case. It's something that required like genuine innovation, and it was something that probably had not been encountered previously in the training data set for his AI assistant. So I think that probably tells us something, that there are use cases where you can get like maybe a good boost from AI, and there are others that are maybe not such a good fit.
I think here's the difference, and vibe coding is really fun. I don't want to be too negative on vibe coding, but I don't think vibe coding is very good in meaningful professional workplaces. For example, like you want to create a fun app or game on the weekend, absolutely go vibe code it. But if you care about collaborating on a team, you care about maintaining a code base for multiple years, having enterprise grade reliability and uptime, I think vibe coding is, as it currently stands, a pretty bad option. To me, one of the biggest differences between vibe coding and normal coding, even if you're using AI tools, normal coding, is do you deeply understand and have opinions on the actual code that's being written and architected? In vibe coding, I don't really care. This thing is a black box to me, and I'm just gonna take every error message. I'm gonna feed it back into the AI machine until it eventually fixes. And I'm gonna black box the system, and then I'm gonna look at the outputs. I'm gonna kind of QA test it. Be like, okay, does this app or game kind of feel right to me? That's vibe coding. In software engineering at a company, we're doing things like code review. This gets to my expertise, like code review, which is okay. Hey, however you created this code change, whether you asked an AI to make it or you hand typed it, at some point around the 100 to 1,000 line diff mark, someone's going to review it and read it and think about it carefully and think about how it integrates into the overall system and debate whether this architecture is right or wrong or if you're using the right patterns. And that still matters a lot. And why does it matter? Because people start caring a lot about the around the uptime, the bugs, the maintainability, the extensibility. People are going to have to perform DevOps. People are going to have to be thoughtful around how they roll it out, how they provide a database upgrade or migration. What happens if yesterday AWS was down for half a day? It really matters that engineers know like what's running on those production grade systems so they can figure it out and debug it and help restore the internet for the rest of the world. That's where vibe coding to me falls apart. Is it's the day that engineers don't really understand the code that's running in their systems, and that they don't understand how to iterate or have opinions on the strengths and weaknesses of those architecture. And to me, that's actually orthogonal to raw AI coding. I think you can use autocomplete. You can ask, like Claude Code to help you with a code change, but do you understand what you're doing? And are you still code reviewing it and testing it and being thoughtful around the rollout, very incremental? That's what really matters to me. Vibe coding, I think, will remain for more experiments and weekend projects and whiteboarding sessions.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the crucial point is precisely this. So basically, knowing what you're doing, you may take hints or entire code blocks or modules even that are suggested by your AI assistant, but you should always be in a position to actually dissect the code and decide, well, okay, does it do a good job? Could I possibly change it in that way? Will it maybe have this negative side effect that I'm going to, trip over down the road and so on? So basically, use with caution would be, I don't know, my one liner to this.
Yeah. I think we're entering a world where code review has never become more important, because I used to be able to trust George. If you and I were coding together and you submit me a code change at work, I used to be able to trust that at least you read it and thought about it really deeply. Heck, you had to, you wrote it. And I'm there and I'm going to double check you, but I have some trust in you as a human and as a teammate. Now, in 2025, I don't know. Maybe you thoughtfully wrote it, or maybe you were watching, a TV show and you asked Claude Code to write it, or maybe maybe Codex or one of the background agents just created this code change and no human has ever laid eyes on it. Now it really matters that the code review step, someone's grokking it, someone is thinking deeply about it and testing it and taking ownership for the impact of that code change as it goes out the door. It's interesting. The purpose of code review, I think, is really becoming magnified in its importance in pedagogy, in accountability, and some of these deep-rooted meanings.
Yeah, and well, I think you also just described one of the side effects of using AI in general. So one of those is, well, the non-determinism aspect, at least, the transformer-based AI that we mostly refer to as AI these days. So, as a previous guest on the podcast said, well, you may get it perfect like 99 times out of 100, and then the 100th time it just goes completely off rails and it throws like a random bug that you'll never be able to figure out. So do you think that this non-determinism aspect in a profession that used to be precisely founded on the idea that things may be complex but they are deterministic, if you dig deep enough you can find the root cause and you can fix the bug and you can ship working code? And do you think that adding this element of non-determinism changes the picture radically?
I don't worry too much about it. And here's my reasoning. To me, the AI code, and assume we're limited to AI code gen, but we're thinking about AI code gen. Either you, my teammate, wrote the code, or an AI bot wrote the code. Both are fallible. You can make a mistake. Yeah, look, we're human. Look, we write bugs. If I write 100 code changes, yeah, you're right. 1 out of 100 is going to have a bug. The AI bot can make a mistake too. It's like self-driving cars. Now we can debate like which one makes more bugs and stuff, but in both cases, there's a like these are fallible systems. Someone's going to make a bug. My question is, what are we doing about it? How are we thoughtfully testing, reviewing that code? How are we thinking about the architecture around that code to say, hey, let's assume there's unknown unknowns in the system. How are we protecting the blast radius of that? What happens if this new module, this new library errors? What's going to happen to the overall system? Are we architecting things in a graceful way around that? Are we rolling it out incrementally, watching the errors, and then performing DevOps and conducting a rollback if something goes wrong? I already act as an engineer assuming that any code change might accidentally have an issue in it, and yet we achieve good uptime. And the reason that works is because there's a lot more that goes into engineering than just writing the code. We kind of bake that in. So I think in the era of AI code gen, the old practices are still quite useful. Modularizing my code to limit blast radius, being thoughtful around error handling, being incremental rollouts, being thorough about my testing. All of this used to matter with humans and now matters with AI. What's silly, the mistake to be made is to assume that this AI is so much better than a human, it's not going to make bugs, and to throw away all those practices. And as we lower the bar to generating that code, there is a risk that people forget to apply all the other classic practices. But I think they're just as important, if not more important now. And what's great, you know what? We got more time, because everyone keeps saying, like, what are we going to do when we get all this time back that we used to spend writing code? Well, I'll tell you, let's go into the outer loop of software development. Let's go spend our time becoming really, really good at the testing and the rollouts and the validation and the DevOps side of that. Because at least today, there's not a clear short-term path to automating all that away. So I think there's some great work and energy to be done there. But I don't worry. You ask, am I worried about the fallibility and the occasional mistakes of these things? I don't worry about it too much.
Okay, so how do you actually apply this mentality and these actual capabilities that the AI models give you in code review in Graphite? So are you using it as a sort of, well, possibility generator or a sparring partner when people submit their code reviews?
The way we use it in Graphite today, we have a pull request page, so a way to kind of stare at the diff and consider it and review it. It's actually one of the most popular ones in the industry outside of GitHub and GitLab themselves. And the way we use AI, we've kind of walked a very logical path. The first thing we did is we got the LLM to leave comments on your PR. And if you want to be a fancy marketer, you call this AI code review. If you want to be a logical engineer, you might call this like AI testing or AI linting even. We're running the code through a complex pattern of LLMs, but with the vein of like, hey, read this and tell me that there's some minor mistakes, call out some issues, style, functionality, security, you name it. But try and scan my code and attempt with some accuracy to leave some inline comments. That's what we started with. And now this is very common across the industry. There's a lot of companies and tools and open source patterns that can do this. I think it's great. I think this is like a new pillar of testability and validation on the pull request side of things. You got your unit tests, your integration tests, your linters, and now you have your AI reviewers. But we're going to add that in. It's going to be a nice layer. The second thing we did, I think this was a little more innovative, is we observed some of the patterns that companies like Cursor were applying in the IDE and giving you a chat bot to ask questions, research, reason about, and even mutate the code. And we said, great, let's bring that into the PR page. Because when you're reviewing code, wouldn't it be great to have this assistant that can help explain things to you if you're new, that can help pull in context from outside the code change, from other PRs, other parts of the code base? And also, if you're the author and someone's left you a bunch of comments and you need to fix some stuff up, wouldn't it be great if you could just resolve those right in line on the PR page without having to check out the code, fix it, rerun it, push it back up? So now we have chat on the PR page. I think that's been quite a level up that needs AI. And then the third thing we've been developing, we're alpha testing right now, is the ability to trigger any of these agents you want from that pull request page itself as well. So whether you like your Claude Code or your Codex or whichever coding agent, I think it's fantastic to immediately be able to execute those in a sandbox from the PR page. Maybe you want to resolve merge conflicts. Maybe you want to clean up some comments and retest and rebuild that code. Maybe you want to break that code into two separate PRs. There's a lot of larger operations you might want to do at that code review, that the pull request stage. And I want to give you the ability to execute those and trigger those right from the PR page in a coding sandbox. To me, again, we can put fun marketing spins on this, but I think this is the evolution of CI in a way. Because for a long time, what was CI? CI was, I'm going to give you a sandbox of compute. I'm going to clone your code into it, and we're going to run some scripts you have. Agents running on your PR is roughly the same thing, but instead of running a deterministic script, I'm going to run a non-deterministic Claude Code or Codex, and I'm going to take the output of that and then push it back to the PR. So it's the evolution of CI in a way, but allowing you a lot more power, and all in vein of helping speed up this workflow, so we can keep that outer loop as fast as the code gen side of things is moving. That's how today we're leveraging AI within Graphite. I'm sure we're going to keep finding new and fun ways to apply it. There's AI code tours. There's filling out your descriptions. There's lots of fun things we can do. But those are some of the three big ones we're using.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how are you seeing users respond to those features? I mean, how are they being adopted, and what are they besides? I don't know if you have any metrics that you can share, but what kind of qualitative feedback are you getting? Are they finding this useful or maybe confusing in some situations, or what's the uptake?
No, I think people love it across the board. Now, it's important that you make this stuff an opt-in. So the big caveat, we're not forcing this on anyone. You don't have to run an AI reviewer on your code. You don't have to use chat and ask questions. You don't have to trigger agent. This is all opt-in. So I think we would get harsher feedback if we somehow like forced this upon all the users. But given that it's an opt-in world, I think people really like it. It's not perfect. So the hardest one is AI code review, which is no matter how good you do it, there are false positives in the current state of being, and people get really frustrated when they see a comment that's left that's like, it's kind of, I see why they left that comment, but it's not quite right. It's a little bit of a hallucination, a little bit of false positive there. That really frustrates people. Likewise, people get really frustrated when there is a clear bug and the AI doesn't call it out when it has a miss as well. So that one I think is particularly tricky. Chat, I think it's very positive feedback because it's a relatively straightforward feature, to be honest. It's a relatively tried and tested UI pattern at this point, and we've just brought it to a surface area and given it a bunch of powerful tools. Some people choose not to use it because they don't like the novel UX of it, and that's totally fine. You don't have to. But the people who choose to opt into it and who are a little bit more early adopters in the AI technology, they seem to love it. I don't know. Like quantitatively, I think we've run like tens of millions of PRs through AI code review at this point. We've left millions of comments. We look very closely at the acceptance rate of those comments. We look at a lot of metrics, like are they thumbs up or thumbs down. But one of the things we look at is the acceptance rate. And by acceptance rate, what I mean is, given that a comment was left on a line, what are the odds that that line is updated before it's merged in? It's not perfect, but it's actually an okay proxy to say that like action was taken based on that comment. And what's really nice is we can compare human comment acceptance rate to AI comment acceptance rate, and we can say, is this about as good as human comments are creating action? And the reality, yeah, is yes. It varies week to week, but it hovers around 50%, both for human comments and AI comments. The odds that if one is left, it creates action on that PR. And to me, that's really valuable. And what we see with the users, you asked about qualitative feedback, like a lot of users, they'll turn on these technologies and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, is it useful? I'm not sure. It hasn't commented in a lot of my PRs. It left some, those are okay. And then it'll catch something fantastic. It'll catch, after a couple of days, it'll catch like a really subtle, deep, important bug. And then suddenly the user's like, oh my God, like totally worth it. In fact, I'll sit on this all day. If once a week this thing catches like an amazing, deep, subtle issue, absolutely worth it. Like I'll actually take a couple false positives. I'll keep this thing running. We find that like there's really that fall in love moment. So I think with or without Graphite, we are but one player in the space, but I am very convinced that everyone in the future will run some AI scanner, some AI code review on every one of their PRs. I think this is here to stay as a pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you actually see the software engineering profession developing in the future? And we talked about a number of ongoing things so far, and I think to me, what all of this seems to point to with pretty much certainty, I would say, is that it's going to change. I'm not exactly sure in what way, but people have come to rely more and more on AI assistants. But the thing is that it looks like to be able to productively use this, you actually have to know the basics really, really well. If you go towards the vibe coding side of things, like, okay, hack this thing for me while I'm having my coffee, I don't think it's going to end up very well. So I think it's really, really important that, I don't know, maybe people start their journey into the profession without actual exposure to those tools, so that they get to learn to code, using their own ability, and then they can gradually adopt these tools.
It's the question, like, how do I think modern software engineers should enter the field and think about using these tools? And is there a risk of using them too much as a crutch? I'm on the fence. I mean, we're pontificating, but I think on average, people should be using these tools. I think you should be thoughtful and careful about it. I could compare this to other trends in the history of coding. You could say, should new engineers learn Python, or should we force them to use C so that they understand memory and pointers and have to think about stacks and heaps? Or should we just let them like use Python and HTML and make some websites? You can push it even further. You say, hey, should new engineers write in C, or should we really make them use assembly so they understand like the deep inner workings of how computers work? You can make an argument, but my bigger issue is that if coding is too hard, coding's already pretty hard. If coding's too hard, the bigger likelihood is that someone's going to not learn it. Someone's going to like try it out, not hit the activation energy, and just be like, oh, this kind of sucks. I don't like doing this. I'm going to go do a different profession. I'm going to not fall in love with the craft of software engineering. I don't have that much sacred holiness around how people conduct their engineering. It's kind of funny. As a tool builder, you would think I would. I'm obsessed with the craft. But at the end of the day, I do see that this is a means to an end. And I think a lot of people are trying to make a nice iPhone app, or they're trying to make a fun website. And the tools they use to get themselves there, they're a means to an end. Not everyone needs to be like really deeply understanding and obsessed about this. I think you'll learn it as well as you have to learn it to pull off the job. I think about myself in high school, learning iOS programming, and I was hacking my way through Objective-C, and I was learning some concepts, and I was skipping some other concepts, and I had a lot of memory leaks, and it was still good enough to get off the ground, and I could learn deeper principles around memory allocation later on in my career. So I think it's okay if people pick up and start using AI code gen in order to help them fall in love with engineering and creativity and creating cool technologies. And then over time, their apps crash and they get bit by bugs, and then they have to learn a little bit deeper patterns to go fix that. But maybe the way that they learn about that and how to fix that is also a very AI pilled version. Maybe they're using tools to help them learn, help them debug. I want to be supportive of that. I think it would be way too curmudgeon-y or conservative to say, no, you got to use the way, you got to learn it the way I learned it. You got to cut your teeth on the raw stuff and then layer in the AI later. I think the new generation of engineers, they're going to be using AI from day one, and they're going to be very skilled at it. And I think they'll learn the fundamentals anyways. They'll find a different path to it.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, it does very much depend on the situation. If you're just, like a solo coder working on a fun side project, it doesn't matter all that much, if you have memory leaks and, if maybe after 30 minutes your software crashes, it's fine. If you're working in an enterprise setting, it matters really, really a lot. So you should be very thorough about that.
Yeah, I do think it's funny. I do look around. I'm like, man, I am essentially that C programmer who's looking at a new generation of Python programmers, being like, "Oh, you guys don't understand how the real stuff works." And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to fall into that trap. I want to be supportive of new waves here. So.
Okay, cool. All right, I think that's a nice message to wrap up the conversation, actually, because it's both forward-looking and kind of optimistic, which I like.
I'm optimistic. I think it's never been a more fun time to get involved in software engineering. There's never been more things to build. In late 2010s, we were polishing really most incremental things were like a lot of polish on existing ideas. Suddenly, everything's blown wide open. There's so much overhang. There's so much opportunity to build really novel, exciting ideas. For anyone listening, I really, truly, deeply believe there's never been a better, easier, more fun time to get involved in creating software engineering, building apps, building companies. So I very much encourage people to go try it.
Cool. I think I think you're pretty convincing. So I expect a huge uptick in developer sign-ups programs after this podcast.
Amazing.
Thanks for sticking around. For more stories like this, check the link in bio and follow Link Data Orchestration.